Okay, welcome back everybody. So in today's webinar, we are going to be taking a look at how to create some really cool hover effects, or otherwise known as like tooltips, that you would see that a lot of times people would use JavaScript for. Now, a hover effect might be something like if you were to hover over a text field or an icon, it would pop up a tiny little modal window that's not really a modal window, but it just is another level on the site. So we are going to start from something very basic and build towards that. So just so everybody knows what we're going to do here and how we're going to play around with our code. I'm going to have my HTML here in the body tag, and any CSS we're going to add to the style sheet. Now, we're not going to create a separate style sheet. This way, I can simply give you the final copy of this document, and you will have everything we have done for our work. So, to make sure that everybody is tracking and following with what we're going to try and do, I'm going to try and get this or create this as at the start. It may be very basic, but in the end of this webinar, we may have worked to a point where it's much more advanced. So if what we're talking about right at the beginning, you already understand that, we're just trying to build logic as we go. So when we have something in HTML, and again, I'm just starting with a straight H1 tag saying this is amazing. If we want to have action in HTML, the most basic action is actually adding an href, a link to something else. And immediately when we go take a look at this, we can see that, oh, okay, it has actually modified something with the text that's inside the HTML element. Now it's going to link to wherever we manage something. But we're going to do something a little bit different, because inside our href or something, what we're going to do is inside this anchor tag, we are going to add something that's a little bit different. We are going to add a class, and then we're going to start styling it here in just a moment. Our class that we are going to do is, and I'm just going to call it a DFN Hover. Now, hopefully you remember that the DNF Hover, or sorry, the DNF is an actual HTML element. And so with this HTML element, we're going to have something beyond just an anchor tag. So a DNF, if we do this, DNF is an actual HTML element, DNF. In the same way we have ordered list and unordered lists, we have like a dictionary, a DD, oh, did I do D? Oh. DFN. I can't even type right now. DFN. Oh, it's going to be one of those days. So the DFN HTML tag is I like to do it, it's a defining an instance of a term. So it comes from, it's a standard markup language. We're defining a term. It comes kind of that DD and DF when a different type of ordered list, unordered list. Now, if we wanted to do something like this, watch what happens. I'm going to get rid of the anchor tag just for now. So we have a DFN. And I'm going to do title equals amazing is defined as something wow. So what we've done is we've added a title tag to the DFN HTML tag. Let's go see what that looks like. Again, this is not, we got rid of the anchor tag, but we're going to come over here. So now when we hover over this, look at that. We have the amazing is defined as something wow. So what we've now been able to do is the DFN is a descriptive or something that provides a definition of an instance or something that is surrounded by an HTML tag. So this is a description of what it's surrounding. And what is it surrounding? It's surrounding the word amazing. Okay, everybody follow that so far? So we know that if we use the DFN title, we now have a storage facility of content. So this storage facility of content is something that we'll be able to, let's say, we're going to be able to manipulate it. So let's create something. So in this creation of pieces of content, we are going to, bear with me one second while I'm just making sure my notes are there. Instead of this DFN saying title, I am going to change this to data info. So this is an actual attribute because it's a storage attribute of content. Now, if we took a look at this and went over here and we hovered over this, nothing happens because in HTML, the attribute title, the one we had before, when we hover over something, it actually shows it as a hover title. But we want to make something much more useful, and that is inside this data info. So we need to start styling this DFN tag. DFN does not really have a direct, these are not acronyms, but many times it defines the instance of the term inside. So it's a definition FN. It's not an acronym. Maybe that's what I should do. So we're not going to be able to get an actual term, a word for each one of these letters. Some guy or girl or monkey in the lab decided this is what it would be. So we need to start styling this. So I'm coming up here to the styles, and I'm going to say for DFN. Now remember, this is an actual element. It's not a CSS class. It's not an ID. It is actually an element, so we can just simply type that in. Now in this, I'm going to add a background of kind of a grayish color, and we're going to add a border so it'll be really easy to see, dashed 1 pixel. Now, if I save this and we go back, all of a sudden we're going to get our piece of information that we have wrapped so that we're allowing people who are visiting the site or visiting the piece of content to know that there's something going on here. So maybe I should hover over here or take a look at this because something will happen. It's standing out from what we're doing. So if that's what we're going to do, maybe I'll put a little more padding in there. Actually, I didn't even give the border a color, so maybe RGBA 0000.8. So there's a bit of a lightness to it. We'll add in some padding around there. Let's go ahead and add in, and this is helpful, adding in the cursor help. And let's just go with that. We need one more, and you're going to see why. Relative. We're actually having a position of this. So now when we come over here, we got a little extra padding. And when you hover over, you should see a question mark showing up. It's maybe a little bit small, but hopefully you can see it. There's a question mark showing up in place of the cursor. You see it go away. It's right on top of that red dot. All right. So at this point, see, we've got a data info. We need to use a pseudo class. Now, in the past, I have shown you guys in dealing with pseudo classes, we can use a before or we could use an after. Now, the before and the after pseudo classes normally want a specific CSS declaration, and that is a declaration for what type of content are you going to put in this area. So the pseudo class after says after whatever the element is wrapping, so after that we'll do something, or before, so before the wrapped element shows, we're going to do something. We're going to add content. But one of the really cool things in this content declaration in CSS is we can say, I want you to fill in for the content a specific attribute. And we do that by saying the content is going to be, take a look at that. We are grabbing the attribute of data info, and now whatever is here is going to be inside the content of the after. So let me just quick add a few other things, and you're actually going to start to see something happen. I mean, it won't happen immediately because right now everything is still hidden. So I'm going to do display inline. This time I'm going to do position is absolute. Now remember, the word amazing has a position of relative. Absolute means we're going to be able to position the data content that we store here in a specific location relative to, and absolutely relative to this text. So it's not going to be popping up on the top of the browser. It's going to be connected to this wrapped text because of those two positionings. So now we're going to say top 22 pixels, left 0, opacity or opacity is 0. That means what we're going to have is not visible. The width is going to be 230 pixels. Let's do... That's about what we can add other things. Let's do this. We want to make sure that it doesn't appear when we're hovering over the actual after element. You're going to see why. So pointer events, none. Now, I'll explain this once we actually get this into action. But let me just finish this up, and if I forget to come back to this pointer event, remind me and we will do this. Now, because I know what's going to happen here, I want to make sure that I add in a transition, and we're transitioning the opacity 250 milliseconds and the 250 milliseconds. Now, what this means is when we start to unveil this information from when we hover over the amazing word, we've already said that, hey, we want the top to be 22 pixels up and we want the opacity to be 0, so that when we say the hover, we're going to transfer the opacity to 1, and it's going to take 250 milliseconds to go from completely invisible to fully visible, and it's going to take 250 milliseconds to go from completely unpositioned to its position. So that's the first part, is the after of what we're going to do. The other thing that we need to start to do, and I'm going to actually, we're going to do the DFN before once we start to add in some more effects. So this is one of the really cool things about CSS. We can combine pseudo classes like hover with the before and the after. So that means I can go DFN and add the pseudo class of hover, and so that would be when we are actually hovering over the word amazing, because the DFN is the element. And because the hover, we just want to do a z index 2. Now, because these already had positioning, the amazing and this had positionings that were set, we can use z-index, and then if the hover is the only thing that has a z-index, so that would be like the layers that we're going to do, everything else is just assumed to be 1, so that whenever we hover, whatever's going to happen with the DFN stuff is going to now keep the info on top of other stuff. So if that would be, and I'll show you, if we have additional text in a paragraph, our tooltip is going to show up on top of something. So let's finish this up by doing the DFN hover, and now I can do the after of opacity 1, and I'm going to just do 2 of these just so that we can mess around. Actually, no, I don't need to. I'll put it all into 1. Top 30 pixels. Okay, so let's now take a look on the front end of what we're doing here. So all of a sudden, look what just happened. When I hover over this, I get all of that content that was showing here. But we need to do a few other things, because this is where the before and the after work together. So we did our after, now we need to do before, because simply displaying the content inline and just giving it a width and not much else, it's not being displayed as like a block. It's not being displayed as a few other things. There's no border going around things. It's kind of like the after is dealing with the content. The before is going to deal with the block that shows up. Now I'm going to add 1 or 2 other things to the after, which is dealing with the actual content that's shown here. Why is it dealing with the content? Because the content is the attribute of the data info. So now let's do just one of the things. Let's make the font look a little bit different. So we'll make it smaller, 13 pixels. Font weight, make it go bold or something. Line height. These are all just font. The after is going to be our styling of the content. Padding 0.5 EM, 0.8 EM. Maybe we'll add a background of RGBA, 00. We'll keep that kind of gray out there, and then we'll make the text show up in white. So let's take a look at how that changed the text just a little bit. Okay, so now we've got like this gray block. Text is showing up. But as I said, we also want to do a before. So before, we want DFN before. Now, anytime you use before and after, you're going to be using a double colon, because that differentiates it from a regular pseudo class. Because the actual pseudo class for after and before is this, but because it's we have to go beyond that. So the actual pseudo class, this would be like hover, See, the colon is part of that, but in order to connect it to an element and say it's a pseudo class of this, because the colon is already part of this statement, we've got to have 2. So that's just why there is 2 there. So let's go ahead and add in things. You always start, anytime you use before and after, you always start with content. And now we don't need to add anything into the content because we've done all the content building from the attribute. Hugh, thanks for the just reworking my brain. Okay, so the content is there. We're going to display this as a block. Position, absolute. Now notice how anytime you're working with after and before, notice how the first 3 things were the same for both. Content, display, position. Content, display, position. And then as you move beyond there, that's where you can get some basic stuff. Do I keep saying DNF? So DFN. So let's do top 12 pixels, left 20 pixels, the opacity, if I spell it correctly, it would be 0, width 0, height 0, border solid, transparent 5 pixels, border bottom color RGBA. This will make a little bit more sense once we finish this up. Opacity, we're doing the same type of thing, saying the 2 transition things in CSS are going to be the opacity and the top position. And then once we've done this, and again, you'll get this copy at the end, we can now go in and add to this after one, or you just duplicate it because basically it's the same thing. But I'm just going to do before. Opacity is 1, and then this one will be just slightly different. You'll see why. So now that we have both a before and an after, preview this. It's giving the before the element and after the element. It's when it disappears, it's a little bit more useful. Now, remember, I did say I wanted to come back to this pointer events none. When you have a hover element, because remember the DFN is getting a hover element, it means I do not want, if there's an event being placed on this, or it's being moved, or as we're seeing with this tooltip, I do not want whatever is being generated beyond the actual wrapped element, the wrapped text inside that element. I do not want it to be affected by my mouse. So if I did not have the pointer events, when I begin to scroll on this, it would stay open. I just only want it to stay open when I'm on the actual wrapped element. So let me show you what happens if we were to, I'll just delete this temporarily. We'll put it back in. So I'm going to get rid of that border, the pointer elements. Let's go look at this. See, now when I hover, see how I'm able to move on the pop-up window or the pop-up modal or the tooltip? So I'm able to actually move on this, but if I add back in this pointer events none, if I try to move onto this, it's only activated when I'm actually on the wrapped element. All right, let's take this a step further about how this could be useful for something that you may use today. So sure, we've got this data info amazing, whatever. If we used a tool, a lot of us might want to say to someone, hey, we've got, let's do this. So instead of amazing, we're going to remove this. This is amazing. I have an HTML Unicode, the Unicode markup. So that instead, or actually let's do a question mark. Now I've got to go find a question mark. The Unicode picker I use is this one. I love this Unicode picker. It's on all the time when I need to add things. So I need to find a quick little, maybe the question mark is in the punctuation. Here. So all I have to do is click it. It's already saved it to my paste area. So I can come over here and simply hit paste. And now what we're going to see is we've got a question mark. So now, if you need a tooltip built in for your clients, when you have information that's showing up, when you hover over it, it will show the information. Now, we're not going to do it in this class, but if you look at this information, let's say you were using a template, and I'm just going to type it up here at the top just so that we can see it outside of this. Here, I'm going to use an illustration from Pods. So let's say you had several fields that were like tutorial stuff about the site that the client will use. So we could have something like, we'd have a, let's do this, a href, no, let's do a data info, let's do DFN. We'll keep everything what we've been doing. Data info equals, and then you'd have a tooltip field. That needs to be in quotes. Explanation. So in your Pods template, if whatever you wanted to be in a tooltip or a hover or a pop over explanation, because you can simply, in any type of template, you can take whatever value is in the WordPress database and put it into a data info, you'll notice how we can always pull the data info out into the pseudo element of after and before. So what I would encourage you to do is take this sample file, play around with it, move things, adjust the width and the type and the location about where you want this to show up, where you want it to be positioned, how you want it to move. And by doing this and using basically the transition tag, where did it go? Here, transition tag, where you say which elements are we transitioning between for the hover and the non-hover, you're able to then create a solution with 0 JavaScript. All right, well, we can play around with this. I'm going to put the actual file page, which includes the CSS and the HTML, in the replay. I hope this has been, at least eye-opening to see a few of the things that you can do with CSS. And don't forget, tomorrow we start our JavaScript in-depth, starting to work with Vue.js. So when you get the file that I'm going to share with you all, I really encourage you to take the file apart, break it, change different things in the CSS. So take care, everybody.